And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Real Talks. My name is David Steele. So a little bit of background, real quick. So I actually did this the other day, and what ended up happening was that my StreamYard here, the thing that I use, basically was really slow. And so I want to bring you the absolute best entertainment I can. I was going to pre-record these, and I thought, why not? So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to do the quick live stream. When I say quick, it's going to be about an hour, and then I'm going to actually put these private, and then I'm going to download them, and these are all going to be pre-recorded for you guys. So that way you can actually watch them on the date necessary. So as I said yesterday, but I'll do a quick recap, that basically the channel has changed. I used to be, news and entertainment and everything else, and it's still going to be entertainment. And I'm going to be covering the brand new stuff and everything else, but it's going to be a lot of retrospectives. And I have the first 6 months lined up, and I have the first perfect movie already done for you guys. And so that's ready to go. So today, I did it, like I said, I did it yesterday. And basically, StreamYard I figured out why it was slow. So hopefully, when I download this later on today and everything else, this is going to be copacetic. And you guys are going to be able to watch this without having it lag. Because I know I hate that when I'm watching a video and it lags it. Anyways, long story short, that's what's going on. So I'm going to be doing a lot of retrospectives, and this is the first one. I'm probably going to be streaming like 2 or 3 times today. So if you missed this one, don't worry about it. I'll probably be doing another one in about an hour or so. Each one of these is going to about around an hour. So, yeah. So let's just dive right in. So the film I'm going to be doing today is a film that was made 30 years ago. Hard to believe. And it's one of the best films. It was not only one of the best films of 1994, but in that year, but I think it's really a forgotten about film. And I'm talking about Quiz Show. Now, Quiz Show, for anybody who's not familiar with this, is a film that was made back in 1994 with Robert Redford. He directed it. And basically, it talks about the scandal of the game show 21. Now, you might say, well, what is 21? 21 was a game show back in the 1950s. And basically what happened was this was like the invention of television. So nobody had really seen this before. And what ended up happening was, so you have to remember, this is the 1950s. And this was, there were only 2 or 3 television stations back then. You had NBC, this was actually broadcast on. You had CBS, I think, and you had ABC, which came around a little bit later. That's it. So it's not like you had, a plethora of networks. It's not like it's today where you just turn on your TV and list, 120 channels. There were 3 television stations back then. And this was one of the big things back then was quiz shows. So there was a game called 21, and obviously the object was to get 21. So that's a little bit about the story. So let me just preface it by saying this. All of these retrospectives are going to go in a little bit of order. First, I'm going to do an introduction for you guys and give you a little bit of backstory about the film, when it was made, who directed it, who starred in it. Then I'm going to go into the nitty gritty. So then I'm going to be talking about the production, the writing, everything else. And then once all that's done, then I'm going to talk about the plot. And I'm going to, I have a whole bunch of notes here. So I want to go through all of these, or not all of them, but most of them, and really tell you guys why I think this is a fantastic film that needs to be really watched. And then on top of all of that, on certain films, and this is going to be one of those films, I want to talk about where we've gone and how it's changed. So we have quiz show, and then what happened after that. Okay, so let's start with the introduction. So this was released all the way back, as I said, 1994. 1994 was a huge year for films, guys. Okay, you got to remember that. 94 was like one of the premier years, okay, for film. So this was actually nominated for Best Picture. And I'll talk about the accolades and critic reception and everything else later. So this was one of the 5 films that was nominated for Best Picture. There were 5 films back in the day. Pulp Fiction, okay, this is what I mean. This is going to be a huge year. You had Pulp Fiction. You had The Shawshank Redemption. You had Forrest Gump, which ended up winning Best Picture, okay? You had Four Weddings and a Funeral, and you had Quiz Show. Now, it's fascinating because when you actually talk to people and they say, well, what do you think is, because let's face it, Quiz Show is forgotten with Four Weddings and a Funeral. People only really remember the 3 major films that came out that year: Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, and Shawshank Redemption. Now, all for different reasons. Pulp Fiction was a filmmaker's movie. Tarantino changed the game with the movie, okay? Usually you'd have a story that was going from A to B to C to D. He switched it up. People had never really seen this before. It's a film, I mean, the revitalization of John Travolta's career, Sam Jackson, Tim Roth, Amanda Plummer, Christopher Walken had a small little bit. I mean, just ran the gamut. Fantastic movie. Considered one of the best movies of all time on AFI's Top 100 list. Then you had Shawshank Redemption. Of course, Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, Clancy Brown playing the guard. That was a feel-good movie. And people loved it. I mean, it was Darabont, I believe it was Frank Darabont's directorial debut. And he came out and just knocked it out of the park. And so for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's a small little story, a short story by Stephen King. Fantastic movie. Can watch it all day long. And then finally, you had Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump was directed by one Robert Zemeckis. Of course, he did Back to the Future. He did a couple of other films. And that was what won Best Picture. And you could always argue what the Best Picture was out of those 3. And of course, Tom Hanks ended up winning his 2nd Academy Award, in as many years. He ended up winning for Philadelphia the year before. So, Quiz Show is one of those films that's just off the radar. Totally off the radar. And so, that being said, it's one of those things where I think that it really needs to be talked about, because not only is it a fantastic film, not only was the acting great, but we've had thousands, and that's not an exaggeration, thousands, okay, maybe hundreds, hundreds of game shows since then. And there have only been maybe 2 or 3 major scandals. But this one was one of the big ones. So, okay, now that I've gotten all that out of the way, once again, released in 1994, Jessica Lange ended up winning Best Actress. Okay, as I said, Tom Hanks ended up winning Best Actor, and Time Cop came out that year, believe it or not. So it was, Jean-Claude Van Damme was big at the time. Shawshank was actually released 9 days after this. Both went on to garner Best Picture nominations, which I spoke about. So this is a film that starred Ralph Fiennes, John Turturro, Rob Morrow. They were the 3 major players in this. And then you had a couple of co-stars. You had Hank Azaria, which, let's face it, I mean, Everybody knows him from The Simpsons, but he did some acting back in the day. David Palmer, who he's one of those actors that you know his face, but you don't know his name. Okay. So it was written by Paul Antazoro. Okay. This is the same guy that did Disclosure a year later. Okay. Or a year before. That was with Michael Douglas and Demi Moore. That was based off a book adapted. And he ended up writing Johnny Brasco. So, he definitely had a flavor of what it was. He could write different things. He could write dramatic things or he could write serious things. Okay. That being said, what ended up happening, he ended up writing this. Robert Redford. Okay. Incomparable Robert Redford. We're talking about an actor with, The Sting, All the President's Men, directs Horse Whisperer. Fantastic movies. This was another one of his stories that really needed to be told. Okay. So I'm now getting away. So a quick thing. I'm now getting away from budgets. I used to be a big money guy. Like, how much is this going to make? How much that's going to? Ever since the last couple of months, I've really started to get away from how much this is going to make or how much is that. I'm basically basing it on merit. So, but I do want to give you guys an idea of budgets and how much it made because it's important. It's part of the whole movie making process. So this actually had a budget of only, and I say air quotes only, $31 million. And that was really cheap back in 1994. Okay. Mind you, we're not talking about special effects or anything else. It ended up grossing 52.2 million worldwide. Now you say, well, that's a flop. Yeah, it could be considered a flop. But it's also, you got to remember, this isn't anything that's going to blow the theaters up. This isn't anything, so it's not one of those things that you have to say, oh my God, this only made so much money. No, it was, for what it was a very good movie. And the budget was good. So opening weekend, this is mind-blowing because opening weekend is one of those things where you say, oh, how much is it going to make opening weekend? Because that's going to really tell you a lot of how the film does. And you're right. You are right about that because it's one of those things where depending on how much it makes, it could have, once again, we weren't looking for sequels or anything else from this. So this opened, get this, $757,000. That's it. $757,000. That's all it made opening weekend. And it opened in 27 theaters. That's it. 27 theaters. The maximum number of theaters this movie went into was 822. Now consider that for a minute. That's incredible. So still incredible amount. So it, as I said, it opened, it expanded to 27 screens, okay, for the weekend, and ended up grossing, as I said, $757,000, the fifth highest grossing showing on 50 or fewer screens, which is interesting, actually. It's very interesting because you wouldn't think about that. So that being said, it was a fascinating thing. The film gradually expanded over the next 4 weeks to a maximum of 822 theaters and grossed a little under 25 million here in the United States and Canada. Even after it was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, it dropped 63%. So, once again, now, before I get into the plot, I want to get into a couple of the other details of the film. Okay. So first and foremost, I want to talk about before we get into the plot, okay, I want to actually get into a couple of other things, as I just said, but one of them is the historical accuracy. Because with these kind of movies, you have to understand something. They are changed. They are changed a little bit for the um, they are changed a little bit for the um, purposes of the theater. Okay. So, okay. So much of the movie is generally accurate. Okay. Its use of the artistic license generated controversy and criticism, especially the characters. And I will talk about the characters and the major players in just a moment and how they were involved in the scandal. Um, so, okay, so there were two or three major players. The artistic license comprised of 3 years. So this movie was condensed, okay, in 3 years of a scandal into 2 hour film. And they had to because, and it wasn't like they said 1954, 1955. They never gave you a timeline, but they did it. Okay. So they changed the location of Van Doren's first meeting with Goodwin, okay, altering the start time of Goodwin's investigation and making Van Doren's choice to answer the question incorrectly instead of that of NBC. That was the first major thing. Okay. The next thing. So the episode in which Van Doren defeated Stemple. Okay. And I have clips from the actual show that I want to show you guys to really exhibit and push this story along that I'm telling. Um, so let me back up just a little bit before I get into any more of this. So we have two major players here. We have three really, but two of are the players from the game. We have Herb Stemple. Okay. Now he was from Brooklyn. He was Jewish and very bright guy. Very bright guy. And so he had been on this show for several weeks before Van Doren came in. And he had amassed a lot of money, up to the point in which he had won almost $70,000 before Van Doren was before he competed against Charles Van Doren. And so how the game worked briefly was every question, it was worth a certain number of points, and then the points, okay, had a certain dollar amount. So they could have been playing for, I don't know, 500 points per thing. So if it was an 8-point question, okay, and it was 500 per point, they were playing, that question was worth $4,000. That's a lot of money back then. He had $69,000. At the time of this show, okay, they were playing for $2,000 a point. Think about that. $2,000 a point. That's incredible. So every single question, every single point, every single answer, $2,000. So if there was a 9-point question, at that $2,000, that question was worth $18,000. That was a lot of money back then. Okay. Herb Stemple was on there, bright guy from Brooklyn. And so he was the reigning defending champion that was there for several weeks. And we have another player, Charles Van Doren. Now, Charles Van Doren was a professor at a Ivy League school. And so he loved quiz shows. He was a very bright guy. His father was a professor at the same college. And he was astounded with them. And so he really wanted to go on there. He wanted to, it wasn't for fame or fortune because he was already well known because of his father. But he said, yeah, why not? So he actually was going to go in and play tic-tac-toe. Now, tic-tac-toe is one of those game shows that I remember growing up. I'm 48. It was a different version of tic-tac-toe. Okay. Same premise. You had question. It was a question and answer session. Okay. So those are the two main players. Then we had Goodwin. Now, he was played by Rob Morrow. Now, Rob Morrow was a very young actor at the time. It was a very good role for him, I think. May have overplayed it. Some people thought he overplayed it. Okay. So getting back to the other thing I was talking about. The fateful episode in which Van Doren defeated Stemple is inaccurately portrayed. Okay. So Stemple's intentional, incorrect response about Marty, and I'll show you the clip here in a minute. Because one thing I gotta say about this about Redford, one thing that he did, the accuracy was unbelievable. Okay, unbelievable. Down to turning off the ACs actually in the isolation booths. So as I said, the that was incorrect. That was an incorrect score. So let me show you the clip actually from this is Marty. So this is the question that he was incorrect on. And so first of all, here's the shot in the film, okay, in which Jack Berry asks him about the question. Here's the actual clip.
Herb Stemple, you have 16 points. The category is movies and movie stars. How many points do you want to try for from 1 to 11?
I'll try 5.
Which would give you 21 points if you get this right, and you will be the winner again. Because this is a critical moment, if you need some extra time, you can have it. You ask, let me make it sure again, you asked for 5 points. All right. What motion picture won the Academy Award for 1955? You need some extra time to think about it?
I sure do.
I'll tell you when your time is up. Your time is up, Herb Stemple, for 5 points, which would give you 21. What motion picture won the Academy Award for 1955?
Sure, it's not on the waterfront, but that's the only film I remember. I don't remember. I don't remember.
You really want to take a guess at it? If not, I'll have to call it wrong, Herb.
On the waterfront?
No, I'm sorry. The answer is Marty. Marty.
Okay, so that was that was from the show. Okay, and you can, by the way, guys, you can go watch that on YouTube if you want. Here's the thing. So what you saw as the camera zoomed in, it said he had 16 points. Now in the game, in the actual film, it was different. Okay, so in reality, the question was worth 5 points and the score was 16 to 10. So there was a little bit of a difference there. The film also presented this as the deciding moment of the game when Van Doren answered correctly the next question about the Civil War. And I have a clip of that. And Van Doren's next question was actually about Pizarro and the Incas. So this is the clip of the Civil War.
Herb Stemple, $69,500 is at stake. At $2,000 a point, of course, the winner will get the difference at the end of this match in your scores at $2,000 a point. The category is the Civil War. How many points do you want?
I'll try 9.
For 9 points. Because he did not sanction secession, this man was the only Southerner who refused to leave the United States Senate when his state seceded from the Union in June of 1861. Name him and the state he represented.
Andrew Johnson of Tennessee.
You're right. You have 9 points. Mr. Van Doren, you have 8 points.
So you see, it's one of those things where, and that was actually Stemple answering that. So there was a little bit of an inaccuracy about that. So it actually ended up, Stemple answered the next question correctly about the voyage. Okay, but this was a 21-21 tie. So that's where the inaccuracy came in. Okay. The final thing about this, the final historical accuracy about this, the film's magnification of the role that 21 played and its producer Albert Freeman played in the scandal was by Jeff Kisselhoff, who wrote a book called The Box: An Oral History of Television from 1920 to 1961, as Freewell himself. Now, he argued the dishonest practice originated in the radio era, where players were overly coached. Goodwin basically, let me find that again. Goodwin's role in the investigation, he only became involved 2 years after 21 was ended syndication. So it's not like this show was still in the air. And as is portrayed in the film, that it's still in the air and it's going on. It was off the air for a couple of years and was in syndication. And a collection of information was handled by publications and in ADAs. Joe Stone, a congressional committee consultant, investigated the scandal for 4 years and was angered about the screenplay spotlight on Goodwin and the fact that he accepted most of the credit on covering the scandal when the film was released. Now, these are all minor things in the grand scheme of things, okay? So other dramatic liberties include the simplification of the character of Van Doren, who is, quote, is a shallow icon, devoid of the ambiguities of the actual Van Doren. In a 2008 edition of the New Yorker, Van Doren wrote about the events depicted in the film. He agreed with many of the details, but wrote that the girlfriend at the time at his 21 appearances was not depicted in the film. Now, that's fine. I mean, not fine. Let me rephrase that. It was about Van Doren. It wasn't about the relationship between he and his girlfriend and how that's changing. We did see that, however, in his father. So what Redford did was, there's a scene at the beginning of the film where Stemple comes home from a taping and he's high on life. He just won another game. He's got all this money together. And it was one of those things where his wife was on the phone with her family and saying, oh, he's not good for you, blah, 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 blah. That being said, we saw how Stemple took to television. He loved it. And that's one of the themes of this, and I'll get into it a little bit later, is how television changed people. We didn't see this between Van Doren and the girlfriend because she wasn't depicted, but we did see it between Van Doren and his father, which was a different dynamic. So keep that in mind. He also noted that he continued teaching after the scandal, okay? And that was one of the inaccuracies at the end of the film when Goodwin was actually... So essentially what ended up happening was Goodwin was very reluctant to go after Van Doren. Because he didn't want to ruin his reputation. But he eventually had to testify in front of Congress. Stemple kind of made a mockery of himself at the time. But, Van Doren, he broke it to his father, okay? And then he had essentially faced the music. And he had to go in front of Congress and say, this is what actually happened. And so that was one of the things in which he had to do. And so at the end of the film, when we see him leaving, okay, we see that one of the last shots is the pan out of the Washington and everything else. And basically it was an epilogue stating Van Doren never teached again, but that wasn't true. So there was a little bit of inaccuracy about that. And for legal reasons, they changed somebody's name, that the owner of Geritol, okay? And that Revlon had sponsored another quiz show during the scandal, the $64,000 question. So it was one of those things where basically there was another show on at the time. However, they only focused on Geritol, but Revlon actually did. And that's, the old line, well, what's the $64,000 question? Well, that's where it came from. Because there was a quiz show back in the day called the $64,000 question. So those are all the historical inaccuracies about the film. So Robert Redford, actually, the reason why he wanted to take this on, one of the major reasons why, he grew up with basically, he grew up with a film, or grew up with a show, and he wanted to actually do a thing about it. So Redford actually saw 21 back in the late 1950s, and he was taking acting classes in New York, and he recalled seeing Van Doren on the show, and he remembers seeing him, quote, watching him, and the other contestants was irresistible. The actor in me, this is what Redford said, the actor in me looked at the show and felt like I was watching the other actors. It was too much to believe, but at the same time, I never doubted the show. And I never had any evidence television could trick us. But the merchant mentality was taking hold, as we know it now, and there's a little morality there. Redford described the scandal as, quote, really the first in a series of scandals that have left us numbed, unsure what to do or who to believe. And that was a major, major theme of this film. It was deception. It was deception in how the public was duped. And that leads me into the themes of the film. Okay? That leads me into the themes of the film. Because this is one of those things where there were so many different themes about this. And it's one of those things where some of these are still ringing true today. Okay? So, the themes. Quiz show is based off of a tale about loss of innocence, both of the main characters and the entire country. And this is still, there we go. So one of the major themes of this was the loss of innocence between the characters and not only of the country, but of the characters. Okay. And then you had the temptation of money. Okay. I mean, Van Doren says, he's walking down the stairs. He says, like, I can't believe I just won $20,000. Like that. Moral ambiguity. The positive guise of hiding negative actions. The celebrity of cult. The negative sides of fame. The power and the corruption of big business and media. The consequences of over competitiveness in business, racial and ethnic and class conflict, and the discord between education and entertainment. So let's unpack all that for a minute. You had so many different things. Okay. You had Herb Stempel. Okay. Once again, extremely bright guy. Okay. He was Jewish. And he was looked upon as, well, it was definitely a class thing, right? Because there was a scene where Goodwin is talking with the producers, and he's like, look, I did the research. When a Jew wins this amount of money, a Gentile always comes on and wins more. And they laughed. The producers laughed it off. He's like, no, but it's true. So you could definitely see there was class, some sort, because don't forget, you had Charles Van Doren, who was upper class. He was living the high life, right? And that being said, you saw the disparaging things. Okay, so that's the racial, or that's the ethnic type of thing. So you have upper middle class to middle class. So then let's talk about the temptation of money. So one of the major things about going on a game show, okay, is basically winning a lot of money. That's why you're going on to a game show. Any contestant of any game show, that's what you're hoping to do. Whether it's Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune and The Price is Right, you're hoping to go on winning a lot of money. That's just a fact. Um, and when those people that do go on and win a lot of money, like a Ken Jennings, like a Brad Ritter, like a James Holtzman, um, you go, wow, it's $1.5 million. Oh my God. The thought of winning that kind of money, that life changing money, is unbelievable. You go, I want to do that. I want to win that much money. So you definitely see the thought of the dollar. It's like those old cartoons, the dollar signs start popping in your eyes. Okay. So the money, and it was a really fascinating quote that I have that I wrote down. And here's so one of this is the shot. By the way, and I said this yesterday, but for anybody who's just brand new going to watch this, guess who that is, guys? Yes, that is a young Martin Scorsese, the same director of Goodfellas, the same director of Casino, the same director of Killers of the Flower Moon, the same director of Raging Bull. A young Martin Scorsese. Now, this was 1994. He did Raging Bull back in 1998, but you get the idea. He was the sponsor. He was a sponsor of Geritol. And so this is a scene where Goodwin and the sponsor are basically facing off. And Goodwin is like, I got you. I got you. I got you. I got you. And this was the quote by the sponsor. Goodwin had sat down with him and he talked to him. And this was the quote. And by the way, this rings so true today. Think about this. The shows will be back. They didn't want to watch some intellectual. They wanted to watch because of the money. And he's so right. He's so right. Because think about it. Somebody wins $70,000. They go, wow. You're thinking to yourself, I could use $70,000. What could I do with $70,000? And that's the thing. They didn't care about the person. They cared about the money. And so that was one of the major things. So one of the other themes that was a big, so the corruption of big business. You have to remember something about this. This was a film. This was one of the first TV shows on the air, but it was only, usually when you watch, say, it's sponsored by or a promotional consideration by, they'll list a couple of companies and whatever else. This was one sponsor. Think about that. One sponsor. So at the very beginning of the show, it says, Geritol presents America's favorite quiz game, 21. They were the sole sponsor. So when their ratings started to dip, they went, well, we got to get somebody else on. And then that's when the producers started looking for somebody else, and they upped the ratings again. So you never had a show after that only had one sponsor, ever. There were only 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 sponsors because they had to make sure everything was on the up and up. That's where the corruption came in. Once again, class conflict and entertainment. I mean, that's essentially what it is. Television, it's entertainment. So the writer and Redford considered many of the film's critics' quiz show subject matter as it marks the beginning of the countries of the loss of the innocents and the faith in the institutions that was exacerbated by events such as the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. And ironically, of course, many years before that, Robert Redford did a little film called All the President's Men. And that was all about uncovering the Watergate scandal. So it was very interesting to see that. But you did have, let's talk about that though. you had the loss of the innocence. This is where television, the bad nature of television finally came out. And it was one of those things where they go, oh my God, they deceived us. They duped everybody. Everybody. And it was hard to imagine that, because at that point, everybody thought whatever was on television was real. They never thought, oh, well, it's fake. And after that was the beginning of the end. And it really took a long time before people started to go, well, maybe it's not everything it was. So, yeah. So that was that. So let me go back to the making of the film, because that's where I think a lot of this really, this is how films, the backstories of films, when you know the backstory about a film and then you go and watch it, you look at it differently, completely differently. So the development of this film started when Robert Redford read a rough first draft of a production in which he directed. A river runs through it. So a couple years ago. And he was looking, quote, looking for something edgier, fast-paced, urban, where I can move the camera more. Okay. Barry Levinson's Baltimore Studios and TriStar began development of a film project in which about the quiz show Scandal, which proved difficult to sell because of the uncommercial style and subject matter. I mean, let's face it, it's not the sexiest material in the world. Let's put it that way. There isn't those major explosions or action or anything else. This is there are a lot of long-winded scenes. And unless you really, really, really like film, it's going to be very hard for you to sit down and watch a 7-minute scene between two people going back and forth, verbally jousting or talking about this or whatever else. So, TriStar placed it in its turnaround in September of '92, and then it was moved to Disney, believe it or not, which invested $20 million in the budget. This is Disney we're talking about. And launched the project in the spring of '93, and after Redford agreed to direct. Although Disney offered Van Doren $100,000, he declined. That tells you something. $100,000 he was offered, and he declined. So casting took place in New York in May of '93. Redford originally planned for an American actor to play Van Doren, but after auditioning several actors such as William Baldwin, he failed to find the quote combination of elements required for the character and awarded the part to the British actor Ralph Fiennes. Now, Ralph Fiennes, you got to remember about Ralph Fiennes. He just came off doing, and he was incredible in it, and that was Schindler's List. So he was already in a top-notch, fantastic film. And for all those who have not seen Schindler's List, A, I recommend it, and I think it's in Spielberg's masterclass. And B, he plays the commandant of the concentration camp. So to prepare for the role, Fiennes viewed clips of Van Doren on 21, which I actually have here, and I'll show a couple more in a couple minutes, and televised interviews with him. Now, you got to understand, and he also visited his home in Connecticut. He was a very private man. Yes, he taught at the university, but he was a very private man. Especially, that's something else you saw too, and I kind of brushed over it briefly. You saw the difference in how they were portrayed, but basically, moreover than anything else, it was, you saw Van Doren be he didn't like the spotlight at all. When he was on the Today Show, he was very like, okay. Stemple loved the spotlight. He was basking in it. So when he lost, it was crushing to him. Van Doren didn't want anything in the spotlight. And I think that was a major key. And that was beautifully shown, between the two characters, there's juxtaposition between somebody who wanted to be in the spotlight and somebody who didn't want to be in the spotlight. And I think that was incredibly important to show. So once again, to prepare for the role, he interviewed clips. He went to his home. Although the men didn't meet, Fiennes gained a sense of atmosphere that he had during his home. Paul Newman was, believe it or not, Paul Newman, the legendary Paul Newman, was considered for Mark Van Doren, but he declined. So Mark Van Doren was Charles's father. So that was his name. In May of '93, Chris O'Donnell was reported to be in talks with Redford, but he did not get cast, actually. So once again, John Turturro. Let's talk about John Turturro for a minute. He is a really, really, really good actor, okay? He's an actor that I think is underrated, not only in this film, but in general. One of my favorite films, and anybody who knows about me, is Rounders. I love Rounders. I can recite the whole movie to you. Kanish has a very small role, but I love John Turturro in that. But this is the same guy that did Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing. Okay? And he's done other films like Transformers and other. He's a wide actor. The spectrum that he has is incredible. So when Turturro got cast, it was really something interesting. Turturro found it easy to assume Stemple's character, but he gained 25 pounds for the role and actually altered his voice to mimic that of Stemple's. After his initial success in Northern Exposure, Rob Morrow. So Rob Morrow was one of those actors, one of the great little shows. It's not on, you can probably find it in syndication on like Tubi or somewhere else, is Numbers. So that's David Goldsmith's, and I think I'm mispronouncing his name, and then Rob Morrow. And one of them was an FBI agent, and the other one was a brilliant guy at Caltech, and they actually solved murders. Fantastic. But Rob Morrow is actually he's a really good actor, and he never really took, even today, he never really took off. But he was offered other roles, rejected them until he received a quiz show. This was his quote when he said it. Quote, "I knew this was the one. It was a cachet of Bob Redford, and it was incredibly Robert Redford. It was a cachet of Robert Redford, and it was incredibly well written. In getting the idea for the characters of Goodwin, Morrow read 4 of his books. Now, Levinson, who was originally attached to the project to direct, but because of his commitment to Bugsy, which was a couple of years earlier, the job went to Redford. By the way, Bugsy, another great film. Warren Beatty, go watch that one too. However, Levinson was then cast by Redford as a part of Dave Galloway. So that is, as Redford liked his, quote, easygoing and casual manner and the interest of the 1950s culture. For the scene involving J.F. Muggs, a chimpanzee, so this was the scene on the Today Show where he was actually on there, quote, was unnerved by the lights and camera was found, so no animals were trained for the film. So as I was talking earlier, Martin Scorsese. Let's go back to Martin Scorsese for a minute. The fact that he was able to get Martin Scorsese to play this small role, it's one of the premier, I won't say cameos because he was in quite a bit of the movie, but still a fantastic thing. Was cast by Redford for his physical features as well as his own, quote, his own personal style and delivery, so I found it interesting to have him play a tough character gently. Because let's face it, Martin Scorsese is, I mean, if you look back at his library of work, it's like you've got Casino, you've got Goodfellas, you've got all these movies, and yet he wanted to actually have him play a tough character who's a sponsor, but to be gentle about it. And given his delivery style in which he talks really fast, and yeah, Marty has a tendency to do that, I thought it'd make the character extremely menacing, and it was. For the little bit of screen time, you remember him. There were things I forgot about this. So, yeah, it was one of those things in which, long story short, okay, this was all about that quiz show. So now that we've talked about the themes of the movie, now that we've talked about the production of the movie, let's talk about the reception of the movie, because that's something that's very interesting. We always talk about movies and how they're received and everything else. So Quiz Show currently holds a 97% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 56 reviews. Now, you say, well, that's quite high for that. The sample size today would not be that small. I mean, you'd probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 or 150 reviewers. So that's something to be said. But it's one of those things where, so the site's consensus, quote, Robert Redford refracts the social, political, and moral issues upon the subject matter through a purely entertainment, well-acted lens. And he's right. He really does. So Roger Ebert, arguably one of the top 3 or top 4 critics ever, I mean, of all time. And that's not an understatement. He gave it 3.5 stars out of 4, calling the screenplay, quote, smart, subtle, and ruthless. Okay, then you had other critics such as Wayne Bernardi, who praised the film with a, quote, superb performances of Fiennes, and wrote that John Turturro is exceptional as the under-charismatic Herb Stempel, and he really was. Entertainment Weekly spoke about the supporting actor of Paul Scofield as Mark Van Doren once again, stating that the relationship between the two Van Doors finds its soul. And this is what I'm talking about. There's a fantastic scene in the film where Charles Van Doren, is at home, and basically he's having cake and he has a glass of milk. And so his father comes down and says, what are you doing up? He's like, I couldn't sleep. And they start having a conversation about when he was growing up. And reminds me of this. And you could see it was right there on the tip of his tongue. And you could see that Charles wanted to talk to him about it. And he didn't say anything. But you saw, it was that 5 or 7 minute scene. You saw the connection between the two people. And it was really a heart-to-heart moment. Because, yeah, they'd had small conversations. But that was it. And that was the time and that was the place that he was going to do it, if he was going to do it. And Scofield was unbelievable. And he only had a small role, but it was a top-notch performance by him. So Kenneth Turner called Scofield's performance his best since the 1966 film A Man of All Seasons, suggested that the film, quote, would have been a very different experience without Fiennes, and his ability to, quote, his ability to project the pain behind a well-mannered facade to turn intellectual and emotional agony into a real-life and living thing. However, he did criticize the exaggerated performances by Turturro and Morrow, and that, you could say that. I mean, film is why I always say film is subjective. Van Doren himself said, I understand that movies need to be compressed and conflate, but what bothers me about the epilogue is stating that I never taught again. I didn't stop teaching. Although it was a long time before I taught in the college, I did enjoy John Turturro's version of Stempel. And I couldn't help but laugh when Stempel referred to me as Charles Van Bleepen Moron. So, I mean, there was some actual things. And, of course, a little bit of an epilogue. Back in 2020, Herb Stempel did pass away at 93, and then Van Doren did lose his life after a very, very long, he was 93 himself, and he passed away in 2019. So, we talked about the film. We talked about the themes of the film. We've talked about what it has done to society and everything else. But there's one other thing we haven't spoken about. And that is what it's done today. Because let's face it, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of quiz shows of all different kinds. Whether it's, Jeopardy, or, not even quiz shows, but game shows. whether it's tic-tac-toe, whether it's Jeopardy, whether it's 21, whether it's Greed, whatever it is, they're all quiz shows to some extent. So there were a couple. There have been a couple scandals since. Okay. The biggest one, I think, and anybody who's my age remembers this, okay, is there was a game show back in the 1980s. Excuse me. There was a game show back in the 1980s called Pressure Luck. Pressure Luck, now, this was 1983, 84. So you have to understand, Apple was at its height powers, which is unbelievable. And it was one of those things where everything was big. Movies were big. We had like Terminator. We had, even, we had big hair. The music was big, Eye of the Tiger, all this stuff. And there was a game show back then called Pressure Luck. Now, anybody who you may have known Pressure Luck as like Whammy or the all new Pressure Luck, or, they brought it back today and it's not the same thing. Anyways, there was a scandal back in, and by the way, you guys can go watch this documentary on YouTube for free. But there was a big scandal back in 1983. 83, 84. So his name was Richard Larson. It was in 1984. Actually, it's interesting because this is the same year that Apple launched the Macintosh. So you would like to think that Apple had some, okay. The biggest scandal since then has happened in 1984 to an unemployed Ohio man named Michael Larson, when he figured out the pattern of the, quote, big board of the wildly popular show Pressure Luck, where he went on to win $110,000. 106 of that was cash, guys. The board had 5 different patterns on it. In order for Larson to know what he was doing, he had to memorize all 5 patterns, okay, and know where to avoid the whammies. Now, the whammies were those little things that bright yellow, and they came in and took all your money, and there was fun animatronics things for those, okay, cartoonish figures, and know enough trivia to stay in control of those segments during the game. But when he took on his board, you could see the level of concentration in his eyes as he scanned the board, following the pattern of the lights, his hand ready to stop at the plunger at anyone he wants. There's a clip of him actually, and this is not a joke, there's a clip of him actually, Peter Tamarkin was a great host. He was a great host. And he really made that show go. I mean, obviously, these were the days of like Wink Martindale and Chuck Woolery and Pat Sajak. But you're right. Peter Tamarkin was a fantastic. By the way, I don't know. I could be wrong. I think that might have been the only thing he ever hosted. But he was definitely a great host. I agree with you, Dadpool. There's a clip. And I don't have it here, and I'm not going to play it for you, but you can go and watch this on YouTube. 8 minutes. 8 straight minutes. And by the way, at the time of the taping, Tamarkin had no idea. He had no clue about this, because he was always getting ready, prepping for the contestants, prepping for the game. He had no idea this could happen, except in the control room. And, there were bits and pieces where they were like, oh shit, what's going on? And they figured it out. The one thing that could happen did happen. Murphy's Law, right? Okay. So, needless to say, this was a thing too. Okay. There had never been a time where S&Ps need to be involved. So S&Ps, for all those who are not familiar with it, are called standard practices. Essentially, they're making sure that you don't cheat. Now, there were some people say, oh, he cheated. No, he didn't. He outsmarted the network is what he did. So, needless to say, after that, CBS immediately changed the number of patterns on the board, and they were trying to figure out what to do. They went through the contract and found that he did nothing wrong. So they paid him what he owed him, $104,000 in cash. And by the way, if you actually watch the show, and by the way, it was broken up into two shows, but if you watch the show and he's following the lights and everything else, you could see he was visibly, visibly upset when he won a sailboat or a trip to Aruba because he wanted the money. Okay, so he returned to Ohio, and this is where he started to go south. Michael returned to Ohio, where he got into other shady dealings, where he lost large sums of money. One such venture was pulling out all of the money in the account. Okay, he took like 30 grand out, and he started to go in his wife and him. He was a get rich quick fast kind of guy. Started to go through. There was a promotion on the radio. If you could find this serial number on $1 bill, we'll give you $30,000. So he and his wife, 8 hours a day. Finally, after the second day, she's like, I'm done. They go to a Christmas party, and everybody knows this. Everybody knows he's got these trash bags of cash just sitting in his home. Okay? And he gets broken in. They never caught the guys, but they broke into his house and stole close to $30,000 or $40,000. At which point his wife says, okay, I'm done. She then takes the kids, and then she goes off to live somewhere else, and then he goes to get a job at Walmart. And he's going to all these different stores. And essentially, he ended up going down to Florida and died like almost 25 years ago, 1999. But that was one of the scandals where it was like, wow. But that was the biggest scandal since. And I think that, honestly, if you really wanted to, I mean, I have an idea that you could actually put together a whole movie. And yes, there's a documentary out there, but you could put together a whole movie about this. And I think there has not been a great game show scandal movie in 30 years. I think this would be it. Everybody loves the 80s. Everybody loves nostalgia. Everybody loves the thought of winning a lot of money. Now, from what I understand, back about 20 years ago, Bill Murray was actually signed on to play Richard Larson. It never came to fruition. But I think you could do it. And it would be, with the CGI you have today and everything, it would be fantastic. But quiz show. It really hit home on a number of different things, on a number of different levels with all the different themes to it. And it's hard to believe it's been 30 years. And I think that, we look back on, we look back on television now, and game shows, they're a get rich quick fast type of thing. I think game shows in itself have been dumbed down. I think it's just anybody can go on a game show, including yours truly, including all the viewers here, and win a lot of money if you have the right personality. And it's not as tough to do as it once was. I'm not saying you have to be Ken Jennings and blow it up. I mean, I've actually, believe it or not, I've actually taken a test for Jeopardy. It's 50 different questions on 50 different subjects. It's hard. And you have to get 85%. You can only miss 3 questions because they want somebody well-versed. And once you get on there, it's a whole different strategy and everything else. But that is life-changing money. And the thing about Jeopardy is, back in the 80s and the 90s, okay, you would go on there for 5 shows and then come back for the tournament champions. Now you can just go on and on and on. I think Jennings holds the record like 59 shows before he lost, but he won almost $2 million. So that tells you something. I love game shows. I grew up with game shows. I remember, this is going to date me, but I remember, The Price is Right, is the one that I've actually been to a taping of The Price is Right. That was a blast before COVID. But before that, I actually tried out for The Weakest Link. Anybody remembers Ann Robinson? There was a takeoff of the British. Okay. But, you have all these game shows today. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Press Your Luck, Match Game, Card Sharks. But I remember these games when they were first implemented, tic-tac-toe. But they're not the same thing as what they once were, because they're just not. And you don't have the same um, celebrity, if you will. And I think that when you were on a game show 25, 30, 40 years ago, and you won a lot of money, you not only gained stature, but here's the thing, you gained a certain level of respect, because it was one of those things where they said, okay, wow, this guy's like untouchable. He can't be stopped. He's a machine. Okay. He's super bright. He's super intelligent. He plays the game well. Today is just they turn him in and turn him out. I mean, you can win $100,000 in the bonus round of Wheel of Fortune. That never used to be. It used to be $25,000. I mean, but I remember game shows Face the Music. Nobody remembers Face the Music. I love Face the Music. Or Name That Tune with Jim Lang. But getting back to Quiz Show briefly. So Jack Berry, okay, who is demonstrated here, okay, on the left, okay, this was his first game. By the way, that's a phenomenal shot of Berry looking over at him. And one thing that I didn't make mention of is they actually mimicked all of the different little nuances in there. So whether they shut off the air, or they were, looking down or blinking or what, you even heard that Turturro actually started to mimic his voice. Jack Berry, okay, people don't know this, but that was one of his first big shows. After the scandal, he didn't do much after that until the early 1970s, when there was a show called Joker's Wild came on. And he came out, okay, and there were two contestants, and the job of, so in order to win the game, you had to get $500, and you had a little lever to pull. And so there were a multitude of categories like science, chemistry, and movies, and news, and current affairs or whatever. And then you had the jokers. And every time you hit a joker, you could multiply it by 100. So let's say you had joker, and science. You could actually take that for $200. If you got 3 jokers in a row, you could win. It was like a wild type of thing. You win. You could answer the one question correctly and win. And then you went over and played a bonus round where they gave you a chance to win a lot of prizes and some more money. But that's what he did after that. And after it ran a couple of seasons, it went off the air. They tried little nuances here and there, but that was it. And but yeah, Jack Berry didn't do much after that. I mean, I'm sure he was on other things, but it wasn't the premier type of thing. But that's, I think, one of the. So they actually did. One last thing I'll say is this: back in the 90s, and you could probably find this on YouTube somewhere, or you could Google this. They actually did try to bring 21 back. I think it was around 1999, 2000. They actually tried to bring 21 back. And so it was put in prime time so people would watch it. And it didn't do bad, but it didn't do great either. And so I think it ran maybe 6 or 7 episodes. Or maybe it was more than that. I'm not too sure. But it got canceled fairly quickly. Because it honestly, it had the same stigma. When you talk about 21, you talk about the scandal of the 1950s. So they're trying to bring it back to like, oh, what are they going to do different this time? Yeah. Excuse me. One of the major things in the one of the major gets, if you will, is right in the beginning of the film, the secrecy of it, right? So you see the vault, the bank, they go to the bank to get the questions, and it's supposed to be sealed, and then they take it, and they have all the police come, and it's delivered to the studio, and then everything else. And yeah. So yeah, it Quiz Show is just, It's definitely a forgotten movie. It's a forgotten movie, and it's a movie that first of all, I recommend it. I think it's historically, yes, there's a couple of liberties taken, but overall, it's a fantastic movie. It's well written, it's well directed, it keeps going. This is a movie, a professionals movie. Okay, not as good as a Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, but definitely you could see the care that was taken with this, with Stemple, and then I've talked about all the themes and everything else. It's unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. So that is quiz show. Um, but so here's the thing. What I'm going to do is um, well, two things. Number one, I want to tell you what you can expect from January and the rest of the month because I think that I'm just starting to come back, but you're saying, what are you going to do? So first and foremost, I have a ton of retrospectives lined up for you for the month of January. I've already got the perfect movie recorded, so that's all ready to go for the first week. This is going to be, excuse me, this is going to be. I'm going to put this stream in private, download it, edit it, and then you guys, if you haven't seen this before, you're going to be able to see it in the first week of January. The films I have coming up, I'm excited to do, and I've already watched quite a few of them. Natural Born Killers, Oliver Stone's unbelievable movie about the media, what was going on at the time. It was so ahead of its time. It's a modern day Bonnie and Clyde film. Unbelievable. And on so many different levels. I have all the notes for that and everything else. Any Given Sunday, 1999. It's turning 25 this upcoming year. Al Pacino, Cameron Diaz, Jim Brown's in it. You have all these different fantastic Lawrence Taylor, Jamie Foxx. Unbelievable. I got Clear and Present Danger. It's turning 30 this year, guys. So I sat down and I watched Clear and Present Danger. So you guys we're gonna be talking about Clear and Present Danger and how what that's not only done now, but back then. And Philip Norris, he ended up doing Patriot Games, and that was fantastic. And so this was the follow up to it. So we got Clear and Present Danger. Street Fighter. Yes, that Street Fighter. That's Raul Julia and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Had a blast watching it. I love the game. Had a blast watching it. I can't wait to talk to you guys. It was so corny, but it was so much fun. Okay. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, guys. That is turning 40 this year. 1984. So good. I've seen it so many times, but it's so good. And it's the juxtaposition of dark and light. So many backstories about that movie. Ghostbusters. Ray Parker, who are you going to call? I mean, the cast is stacked. I don't have to tell you. Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver. Just really, really good. And yeah, so then I got, we got one more. I'm trying to think which one I'm missing. Which one am I like? There's one or two more. I can't. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I think that's going to be for January. That's it. Yeah, big streams. I can't wait to do that. I have some of these all ready to rock and roll. As a matter of fact, I'm going to come back on in about 20 minutes. I want to take care of some stuff, get some better lighting for you guys, and then I'm going to come back probably around 4-ish. Okay. And once again, what I'm going to probably end up doing is I'm going to do the streams live. If you guys don't see them, don't worry about it. I'm going to put them in private, but they're going to be dated. And then what's going to end up happening is you guys will be getting these and you'll be able to watch them when the dates come out. So, and I've got, so for February, I've got Black History Month all lined up. perfect movie is going to be Get Out. I'm going to be talking about movies like In the Heat of the Night, The Butler, 42, unbelievable, Black Panther, unbelievable movies. What I'm going to do in March. So the way it's going to go is this. You guys are going to get a perfect movie to start. The first week of streams, it's going to be 2023 retro, 2024 preview, and another retrospective. Weeks 2, 3, and 4, it's going to be retro, stream, retro. And that's how it's going to go for the rest of the year. In March, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch, and I will have watched quite a few of them by then, all of the Marvel movies. Every single one. Now, obviously. So what's going to end up happening is you guys are going to get 2 a week. Okay? And you're going to be starting with Iron Man, and then the second film after that, and then it's going to go for the rest of the year. And it's going to be about 4 months. I think there's like 32 films. You guys are going to be getting 8 of those a month. Now, I will be mixing in the big films like Dune Part 2, awards stuff and everything else. And I am going to try and get some other people on. And Deadpool, I would definitely want to partner with you on some of this and do that. But yeah. So that is the thing for 2024. So I do have a couple of goals, as I said in my last video, but I want to kind of say it now again. First and foremost, I want to grow the channel. So if you guys watch this and you like what you see, I'd ask a couple of things. And there's a ticker down there at the bottom. Number 1, drop a super chat. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. Number 2, you can do what Dad pulled just the other day, and I thank you again for that, very much so. Become a channel owner. And I have 3 very affordable levels for you guys. The first is $2.99 a month. Middle is $5.99 a month. And the big one is $10 a month. You can't do anything today for $10 a month and get all this entertainment. You can't. But you can help me out, support me in my journey, and I will give you, fantastic stuff. Yeah, and that's it. And basically, I want to get this channel going. And I have a lot. We're going to be covering the Oscars. We're going to be covering the Globes. I'm going to be trying to get Matthew Anderson back on to talk about the Globes. The nominations just came out this week, this last week. So a lot of interesting stuff coming up. So, yeah, that's where we're at. So that's going to do it for Quiz Show. And once again, you want to help me out? You don't want financially support? I get it. However, drop a like and subscribe, guys. That way you never miss a video. And I'm going to be coming back in probably 25 minutes. So we'll call it like 4 o'clock. And we're going to be doing natural born killers. So I cannot wait to talk to you guys about it. It was so good. It was dark. Very, very dark, but very, very good. Okay, guys. So that's going to do it for me for the time being. Guys, check me out in about 25 minutes. I'll make the studio on, and you guys will be able to take care of that. So, and by the way, I know the lighting has gotten very dark here in the last. By the time the next stream happens, it will be a much better lighting situation. On that note, guys, do the 3 things that I always tell people to do. Take care of yourself. Be safe. And have a great rest of the day. And I'll see you guys back here in about 25 minutes. I am David Steele, and you have been watching Real Talks. Bye-bye, guys.